Hey guys, welcome back to my Animal Adventures YouTube channel, and in this video I want to show you what I'm using for snake bedding. And what I'm using right now is a compressed coconut husk chip that I expand with water. I'm going to show you how I expand my compressed blocks with water, how I use them in my racks, and how to know when it's time to replace the bedding in the snake tubs. So there are quite a few different brand names of essentially almost the same thing. It's a coconut chip husk that's compressed, and I'm going to show you this. I have a block right here. I actually took it out of the bag. It comes in a bag like this with a little handle on it, and if you cut the bag off, this is what the block looks like, and you wouldn't believe how much this expands. This thing will fill like a whole tote full of expanded coconut chips. And I actually get it from Pro Coco, and I actually order it by the pallet, and you can get probably 100. I think it's 105 blocks for about $1,000. So it comes to just under like $11 a block, and one block essentially fills this whole tub. So for my retics, I use a whole block in their enclosure. Actually, this might be a little less than a whole block. And you can tell when it's ready to replace when you mist it down. I use a little watering can and water it down, and it doesn't smell fresh anymore. It smells pretty bad. and typically a lot of the snakes will dig into it and kind of some will sit on the hot spot on top of the coconut husk chip, and then some will actually sit down on the bottom. And I prefer that they actually sit on the chip itself, because then if they go to the bathroom here, then they're not sitting in it. And a lot of times, if they do go to the bathroom, most of the times they'll crawl up onto the chip and then go to the bathroom somewhere else and then come back to the hot spot, which is pretty interesting. And I've been using it in pretty much all of my tubs so far. This is one of my holdbacks, and see, he's sitting right on the coconut husk. And if you just kind of go through, this one's sitting right on top of it, so it doesn't really matter. I think if they sit on top of it, it insulates a little bit more, and it doesn't give them quite enough heat. And what I like to do is kind of dig down a little bit, so it's a little bit thinner of a layer, so they can get to the heat, but they're still on it a little bit. And the only thing I really don't like about it is I just went through and changed all the waters yesterday, and like this one I already put some in there, and it turns into like a tea, which I don't know if it's really good for him to drink the tea like water, but I don't know if it would hurt him or not, but it definitely stains the water. And here's my big beautiful bamboo male. And the other thing is it tends to dry out quite a bit. And see, sometimes if they put a lot of chip in here, it gets so full of the chip it almost turns like to a slurry, and they really can't drink it. That's what I don't like. You know, that's the advantage of the paper over the chip, is that you don't get that in the water and you're not chasing the water bowls. But I found that it's quite a bit less maintenance if you have the coconut husk chip, because it lasts a lot longer. And I pretty much change this out once a month, and I'll just go through like a couple times a week and I'll spot clean, and a lot of times it'll stay clean for a lot longer versus if you're using paper. So if you're using paper, what happens is typically, especially for these big snakes, is when they go to the bathroom, especially when they pee, it kind of ruins the whole tub and all the paper, versus the coconut husks, they kind of stay up on top of it, and it kind of soaks in, and you can kind of spot clean a little easier. The only thing is you could definitely notice, especially on the big snakes, if you come in a few weeks later and you hit it with a watering can, you get kind of a weird, musty kind of a smell, and it's definitely time to change out the bedding at that point. But normally when you first use this, it smells really good. I really like the smell. Then it makes my whole reptile room smell really good. So what I used to do when I use these blocks is I actually used to put them in these totes. So I put it in a tote like this, and I would have two totes, one filled with water, and I would take this out and I would dunk it in the other tote, and I would put it back for it to expand. And the problem is with these totes is I would find if you're moving them around a lot of times with water in them, the one with water, it seemed like it always would eventually crack on the bottom, and it would start leaking water all over the place. So what I do now is I actually expand this. I actually soak it in the sink, in my kitchen sink, and then I put it from the kitchen sink over into this tote. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this up to the kitchen sink. Maybe I'll put this on a tripod and I'll show you how I soak it and move it over to here, and maybe I'll do a little time lapse and we can see it actually expand in the tote. Okay, so I'm up here in my kitchen sink getting ready to soak this block, and I found a couple things that you really have to watch as far as expanding the block. And I would say the first thing here, here's my setup right here. So I have the block in a tote, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the block and I want to put it in the water. And I have the water in here. I filled it up. First of all, the water has to be the right temperature, because especially if you want to use the bedding right away, you definitely want to get it a comfortable temperature for your snakes. And I keep these blocks actually in the garage, and it's freezing outside right now. So what I do is I heat the water just a little bit more, so that way when I soak the block, it's not the cold from the block kind of brings the temperature down to the water, and you have to do it a few times to really get the feel of it. The other thing is when you soak the block, you really want to watch the time you have it in here. So you have to submerge it, and then you have to hold it for a certain amount of time. If you leave it in there too long, the block starts falling apart. And if you don't leave it in long enough, you'll end up with a solid core that's really big when you put it in here, and it won't fully expand. And typically I'll get a smaller solid core, and I actually have to dig it out and soak it for a second time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up on this tripod here, and I am going to show you how I expand the block. Okay, so it's pretty simple. You just take the block and you totally submerge it, and you need enough water to where it's totally submerged, but it doesn't overflow. And you can tell I've done this quite a few times to where the block isn't really making the water overflow. And what I like to do is I like to keep it in there for about that long and then flip it. And that seems to get it soaked on one side more than the other. If you leave it on one side, it tends to keep the top a little bit drier, and if you flip it, I found it kind of puts the moisture all the way through. And really, timing is the key. You can see there's a little bit of room between the top and the bottom of the water here, and I can kind of bounce it up and down a little bit. And what I like to do is I like to hold it in the water until the whole block fills the whole thing from top to bottom, and it'll actually mostly expand in here first. And if you leave it in too long, it definitely will start falling apart, and that's when you know you left it in too long. And I'd say 30 to 45 seconds maybe, and you can already tell I can't push it down any further than this. And then sometimes, usually I'll let it come up maybe another inch or two, and see it's completely out of the water. I can't push it down at all. And now what I'll do is I'll pick it up and I'll just let it drain just a little bit, drain the excess water, and then I'll put it in the tub. And let me zoom in on that tub and do a little time lapse, and you can check it out. Okay, so that was exactly 3 minutes with the camera on the tripod, taking a look at this, and it is pretty big. It pretty much fills the whole thing. And typically what I'll do is I'll move it from the corners before it gets this big as it expands, so none of it comes out. And then from here, what I do usually is I just go through and I dig out the core from the middle of the block. Okay, so here is the core that didn't get any moisture to it, and really this depends, I think, on how well the block is packed and really how cold it is. So I can definitely tell this is still pretty frozen in the middle, and I think it's why a lot of it didn't expand. So what I do is I just put this back in, and I'll just soak it probably for another, I'd say another 30 seconds, and then I'll put it back in the tub. Usually just one soak for about 30 seconds. It does the trick on this inner core. So on this one, I'm pretty sure because it was frozen, there's still a tiny little core that I fished out of the core, the inner core, I guess you'd call it, and I'll just soak it one last time and put it with the rest. So here's a neat trick. If you use coconut husk on a large scale like I do, I go through quite a few blocks every month. I'd say probably close to 10 blocks a month. So you're talking quite a bit of an expense for my snake bedding. And what I do is I can actually recoup almost at least 50% of that, sometimes almost 100% of that cost. And this is how I do it. So I scoop it out with the scoop here, and the old stuff is not really good for snake bedding because it smells a little musty in a hot, damp tub, but it's perfectly fine for landscaping and growing plants. So what I do is I get a clean garbage bag in my trash can, and I put that bedding in a separate trash can, and I actually sell my bedding as used reptile bedding, and it's good for landscaping, gardening. Some people use it in their tomato gardens to aerate the soil. If you have a really hard soil, it gives it some aeration. And what I do, pretty much all around the house and all around the neighborhood, and my family and all my friends, they all have snake bedding. This coconut husk is a ground cover over all their gardens. And you can use it in your flower pots and home, and there's a lot of ways you can use it is for gardening and plants, and I love it. It's great, and it looks really professional. I think, as a matter of fact, I think if you got a contract with the zoo, they would probably take a lot of this. And normally, I have more of a demand for this as landscaping material and as soil conditioner than I can keep up with. And usually in the summer, at least once a month, I have some people on a regular basis consistently coming back to me and buying this, and I recoup most of my costs reselling it. Okay, so when I'm scooping it out, getting ready to do a bedding change, what I normally do is I let it dry out a lot because it holds an incredible amount of moisture. And one of these blocks, I'd say, can hold probably 2 or 3 gallons of water. It's pretty incredible. So I let it dry out, and the bags are really light if it's dry. And then what I do, after I scoop it all out, I come in here with a vacuum and get the last little bit. And then after I vacuum, I go in here with F10, spray it down and wipe it down, and then I'll put the new bedding back in. So this is the F10 that I use. It's a snake-safe antiseptic disinfectant. And what I use is, it's got this handy little measure up here, and I use 10 mils per squirt bottle and dilute it with water. Okay, so I sprayed it out and wiped it down, and this tub pretty much takes an entire block of this coconut husk. Okay, so then from here, before I put the snake in, what I do is, this is actually one whole block in here, and it fills the whole thing, and it fills it pretty deep, which I like because you can spot clean really good, and you can take handfuls of it out, and you won't really deplete it between, I usually change it about once a month. What I do is I just put this non-spillable dog bowl in here and kind of tuck it in, and it works perfect. They'd never really spill their water. Sometimes they'll get coconut husk in there and they'll kind of stain it like tea, but they won't spill it. And you also want to make sure to keep it away from the hot spot. And on this tank, the hot spot runs over here, so the water is away from the hot spot. I also like to keep the water away from the ends, so they're not, if they're pacing around the ends, they're not running over the water. All right, guys, are you ready for this? I'm going to move that big snake in there. I got my snake hook here, and I got my cameraman, and let's see if we can move one of these snakes over to this tub. Alright, so this should be tricky because Lucy is right up against the glass, and I didn't really want to move her first. I really wanted to move Sunny. Let's see what we can do here. She's kind of keyed in, huh? I don't know. Might have to open this up a little bit more. I don't want her to come out. Oh, I might not have a choice. Oh, all right. I want Sunny, not you. Move, move, move. All right. I think Sunny's sleeping, and he's sleeping underneath Lucy. Come on, buddy. It looks like he's about ready to go and shed, too, so. Alright. I think I lost my camera for a second, my view. Alright, this is easier said than done. See if I can get this snake out here. Alright, I'm going to hand this off to my cameraman. We'll see if we can get Sunny out. Yeah. Woo! Alright. That's a big snake. Whew. Yes. This is my purple albino lavender. Purple albino super dwarf reticulated python. Oh, he's definitely going in shed. Perfect timing for this new substrate too. He definitely needs a few rats. Feeling a little skinny. Oh, whew. Did it. Alright, so what I'm going to do for now, I'm going to lock in Lucy here, and I'm going to clean this tomorrow. I'll have to expand another block and get her into the other enclosure. Okay, so that's pretty much it. That's how I expand the coconut husk blocks and how I use them in my racks. And typically what I'll do is I won't go through and I won't do all of them at once because it's a really big job changing all the substrate in all these tubs. And what I'll normally do is I'll go through and I'll do the big snakes first. I have this tub over here that I put, actually Sunny, he can actually live in this tub because it's big enough for him, but Lucy, she's twice as big. And I have to work on this tub next. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put new substrate in here, and it's just going to be a temporary holding cell for Lucy. And I'll move her over here temporarily and then clean the bigger enclosure and then move her right back. And then this substrate in here, I'll probably never change it because it'll just be a temporary holding cell, I guess you'd call it. And then I have another tub down here that's not being used. And I'm actually thinking about getting a super dwarf. I found a guy who's breeding Calatola super dwarfs, pure super dwarfs. And they get about, I guess they get about 20 pounds. So it'll be close to the size of that snake I just brought in, Sunny. But it'll be a pure region-specific super dwarf female. And I'm hoping to kind of get more into the super dwarf and use her to breed some of the stuff back and kind of reduce it down in size. So that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.